On this channel, we've discussed several movies that most people would consider pretty bad, but I pride myself on being able to stay upbeat and put a positive spin on all of them, even the much maligned Star Trek V, for example.
What does God need with a starship?
Jim, what are you doing? I'm asking you a question.
I like to think of myself as a heavily caffeinated cheerleader, trying to convince a crowd of curmudgeonly old men to lighten up. But today, I'm faced with my greatest challenge of all, one that may finally force me to hang up the pom-poms and admit defeat. Okay, maybe not my best metaphor. Anyway, before the newest Superman movie hits theaters next month, let's find out if I can come up with anything good to say about Superman 4: The Quest for Peace.
It is the height of the Cold War, and an international crisis has driven the superpowers of the world to ramp up production of nuclear weapons, all while sensationalist media tycoons try to silence calm and reasoned journalism like the Daily Planet. Superman, moved by the pleas of a young boy, decides to take action to rid the world of its deadly arsenal, but while he strives to bring peace to the nations of Earth, Lex Luthor hatches a new villain to defeat the Man of Steel.
In the lead-up to the release of Superman 3, producer Alexander Salkind announced that he and his son Ilya would make a fourth Superman movie if the third one grossed at least $40 million in theaters. Though Superman 3 was considered a critical flop upon release, it did manage to turn a small profit by making a little over $80 million, so plans were underway to continue the series, even as Christopher Reeve made the rounds with the press saying he wasn't going to return to the role. At the time, the Salkinds were already working on the Superman spin-off Supergirl, and Reeve refused to appear even in that film for a cameo, but the Salkinds didn't show any hesitation when they said the role of Superman, like James Bond or Tarzan, could be played by multiple actors. However, after Supergirl, along with the Salkinds' other production at the time, Santa Claus the Movie, became a big financial loss for the producers, they decided to sell the rights to the property, and at Cannes in 1985, they convinced the Cannon Group to buy them. The Cannon Group tended to finance their future productions by selling the international television and home video distribution rights of their current ones, usually at Cannes, but this model didn't really work for movies with a budget of over $5 million, and Cannon had already spent that much just to buy Superman from the Salkinds. The thing you have to understand about Cannon is that the studio liked to take high-profile risks. It made most of its money from reliable action B-movies like Missing in Action, Enter the Ninja, and Cobra, but instead of being satisfied with cornering that market during the home video era, it also produced more artistic-minded films like Franco Zeffirelli's Otello and John Cassavetes' Love Streams, which tended to be critically successful but not particularly profitable, along with more high-profile, bigger-budget movies like Life Force and Masters of the Universe, which tended to flop in just about every metric. Because of this, and because of the Cannon Group's reckless wheeling and dealing at Cannes, along with a few high-profile lawsuits from the likes of David Begelman and Dustin Hoffman, when it finally came time to make Superman 4, the studio was forced to slash the budget from an initial $36 million to just $17 million, over a third of which went towards coaxing Christopher Reeve to come back, alongside a promise to produce Reeve's Street Smart, maybe the best thing to come from all this. Reeve was also given a lot of control over the story, which came from his own ideas about tackling the subject of nuclear disarmament, a subject that became all the more prescient in the shadow of the mostly failed Reykjavik summit in October of 1986. As such, he put together the script with the help of Lawrence Connor and Mark Rosenthal, and in the early stages of pre-production, he was even considered for the director's chair. Though he did direct a few second unit scenes in the final film, he was too inexperienced to direct such a big movie. And so, after being turned down by previous entry directors Richard Donner and Richard Lester, and after Reeve had tried to get Ron Howard to do it, they turned to Sidney Furie, a respected Canadian director working in Britain who had made The Ipcris File, The Boys in Company C, and The Entity. As a side note, there was a lawsuit in which a pair of writers claimed their story treatment had been ripped off, as it allegedly included Superman tossing the world's nuclear weapons into the sun, addressing the United Nations, and using a one-time-only Kryptonian power source to keep from dying. Reeve even admitted to having received their treatment, though he claimed he never read it. The lawsuit was eventually dismissed in arbitration. In addition to the script work, Reeve was also tasked with helping get previous Superman actors back into the fold, starting with Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor. Hackman was convinced to return by the hope that Superman 4 could course-correct the mistakes of Superman 3. And if I'm being completely honest, Hackman's energetic Luthor is probably the best thing about the entire movie.
Guess who? It's your old friend, Lex.
With Hackman signed on, fellow cast members Margot Kidder and Jackie Cooper, who play Lois Lane and Perry White, agreed to return as well, along with Mark McClure as Jimmy Olsen. As he was the only main actor to return for Supergirl, Mark McClure is the only one to appear in all 5 of the original Superman films. Susanna York also returned to voice Lara, Superman's mother, after Marlon Brando predictably refused. For Lex Luthor's nephew, Lenny, they cast John Cryer, fresh off his breakout performance in Pretty in Pink, and the new love interest, Lacey Warfield, is played by Mariel Hemingway, who had been nominated for an Academy Award a few years earlier for Woody Allen's Manhattan. Her character's father is played by Sam Wanamaker, and a relatively unknown at the time James Broadbent has a small role as this arms dealer, Jean-Pierre Dubois. As for the primary heavy, Nuclear Man, he is portrayed by Mark Pillow, an unknown who would go on to have a few minor roles but who is now a fine wine representative that occasionally pops up on the convention circuit. In the early stages of development, Nuclear Man was going to be played by Christopher Reeve, echoing the best sequence in the previous movie, but the idea was nixed in favor of what we got, a blonde muscle man with the voice of Gene Hackman.
You have my voice. No, you have my voice.
There was a subplot involving a goofy, failed Superman clone that was ultimately cut out of the final film, a Bizarro-style enemy that doesn't fare particularly well and was played by Clive Mantle. Filming took place in late September of 1986, entirely in England, because there was no budget to film elsewhere. The studio work was done at Elstree Studios, while multiple locations in England stood in for Metropolis. The most unconvincing of these is probably the city of Milton Keynes, which looks nothing like the real-life UN building. By the way, while I was working on this video, I lost an entire day getting sucked into a rabbit hole learning all about Milton Keynes. It's a wild story, and I'll drop a link in the description to one of the better YouTube videos about it. Getting back to Superman 4 though, the budget also affected the special effects. The front projection technique that had been such a great success for the Salkinds was ditched in favor of a more economical and time-saving optical composite that used bog-standard traveling mats and blue screens. Plans to have Nuclear Man be more of a menacing, shape-shifting monster were scrapped, and action sequences had to be trimmed down to keep from literally blowing up too much money. There is some suggestion that safety on set was partially compromised as well, because one of the film's stuntmen, John Lees, broke both of his feet and an ankle after falling 25 feet as a result of faulty harness wires, ending his career, though he did successfully sue the production for nearly $500,000. The mood on set was reportedly pretty dismal, with even Christopher Reeve admitting to co-star John Cryer that it was going to be a terrible movie. According to an audio commentary by co-writer Mark Rosenthal, everybody involved had started the project with a lot of enthusiasm expecting the movie would be a great return to form, a really special entry in the franchise. But as time wore on and the budget cuts became ever more painful, that enthusiasm had waned away by the time cameras stopped rolling. There was also a lot of tension between Reeve and the director, and a few of the other actors complained that Reeve was being a little too controlling on set. After a poor test screening of the initial 134-minute cut, Cannon made the decision to axe 45 minutes of the film, probably in hopes that they could squeeze more showings out of it before audiences turned away. Cut scenes include the aforementioned subplot involving a nuclear man prototype, more scenes of young Jeremy and Superman, a few more scenes of Lacey and Clark on quote-unquote dates to report on Metropolis nightlife, Nuclear Man making a Wizard of Oz-style tornado in Smallville, a bunch of stuff involving Lex Luthor as an arms dealer, showing how nuclear disarmament paradoxically causes the nuclear arms race to accelerate, and scenes that would have explained why Nuclear Man suddenly falls in love with Lacey and why Superman gets deathly ill after suffering a scratch to his neck. To be fair, the cutscenes are still made on the same low budget as the final film, so they're not great, but their absence goes a long way towards plugging the film's gaping plot holes and confusing narrative logic. The music was put together by Alexander Courage, who did his best to riff off of John Williams' iconic themes. For my money, I think he tries too hard, as the music goes ridiculously over the top at odd points in the movie. But I will admit the score is still one of the film's highlights. Superman 4: The Quest for Peace hit theaters on July 24th, 1987, to mostly scathing reviews from critics and general ambivalence from audiences. It only managed to rack up $15.6 million domestically, certifying it as a flop, and the international box office didn't help, only pulling in $14.6 million additional dollars, not enough for Cannon to recover financially. The company faced more lawsuits, an SEC investigation, and was eventually taken over by the French film company Pathé, all of which I might explain in more detail if I ever get around to covering Cyborg, but that one's pretty far down on my list, to be honest. All told then, Superman 4 was considered a massive failure, and if it weren't for Tim Burton's Batman a couple of years later, the comic book movie genre may have died with it. Subsequent attempts to make another Superman movie could make up an entire video of their own, but it never happened until 2006's Superman Returns, a flawed but admirable attempt to recapture the magic of the first two movies by ignoring the second two. And there's no sugarcoating it, Superman 4 is a bad movie. The special effects are awful, the writing is weak, the directing is painfully workhorse, most of the actors look like they know they're in a bad movie and aren't enjoying it, the editing is choppy, the vocal dubbing is distracting, especially with Nuclear Man and Jeremy.
I tell you who I'd write a letter to that would do some good.
Who, Santa Claus?
No, Superman.
And the action scenes are both brief and uninspired. In the interests of charity, though, I can point to a few scenes that are pretty good, such as this one, in which Lois tearfully tells Clark that she loves Superman and might know they are the same person, or this one, where Clark Kent is distressing over the loss of rural Americana. And from a conceptual perspective, there is a good idea in here. The script tries to tackle a major contemporary issue, nuclear disarmament during the Cold War, in a surprisingly nuanced way that relates directly to Superman's moral character and struggle to do what is right, while also recalling his father's dilemma when Krypton faced imminent destruction. Lex Luthor was supposed to be the personification of unintended consequences, of how the most noble of intentions can be counterproductive. Most of that nuance is lost in the final film, though, but through the deleted scenes, you can see what the writers were trying to do, and it's more compelling than you'd think from a story where Superman nukes the sun. Unfortunately, in those same deleted scenes, you can see that the filmmakers failed at one of their core missions. it's still played like a comedy in far too many ways, more reminiscent of the slapstick tone set by Superman 3 than the epic adventure of the original film. The Nuclear Man prototype is by far the biggest offender in that regard.
The dude of steel. Boy, are you gonna get it!
The best thing I can say about Superman 4 is that I want to like it. The potential for a good movie is there, if only it hadn't been squandered by studio mismanagement and massive budget shortfalls. I will say I get a hearty laugh out of the Statue of Liberty scene, but that's only because the movie has gone so far off the rails the absurdity of it tickles my funny bone. Unfortunately then, even with as much grace as I can muster, I can't in good conscience call Superman 4: The Quest for Peace a sci-fi classic. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. What movie sequels were the most disappointing for you? Tell me in the comments below, and while you're down there, don't forget to smash those like and subscribe buttons. Thank you for watching, and until next time, when I'll take a small step backwards and discuss that other movie in the series, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love, even if it's Superman 4.
I'd like all the people back there to know that our subway system is still the safest and most reliable means of public transportation. Thank you.